Hello, I'm Jose with FrSky North America. In today's video, we are looking at register, binding, and other options in the RF menu. We will cover registering and binding one receiver and also the proper setup for binding multiple receivers in one model file. I will also cover properly testing multiple receiver setups to confirm that the redundancy is operating properly. This video will be broken down into chapters, so if you are just interested in one topic, mouse over the scroll bar at the bottom of this video to quickly find the area you want to go to. First up, let's do a basic register and bind of a receiver. I have my radio over here and I've got a very basic model file that I'm going to start working with. Got my receiver ready and I've got power available for that receiver. First thing obviously is just confirm that you are on the correct version of firmware on your receiver for your transmitter. Once that's done, then we can start the registration process. So I'm going to go into Model, go into RF System, Internal Module, and what that is, so let me just back up a bit. We've got internal module and external module. So internal module is the internal RF module that's on this radio. So if you're buying one of our receivers, like a TD, a TW, or an access receiver, you'll be using the internal module. External module is if you plug a RF module into the back and you want to run other modules. So let's go ahead and turn on internal module. And the first item is state. We want to make sure that's on. And that actually turns on the module. Next thing that's very important is the protocol. TD receiver, so I want to go to TD mode. Okay, then I'm just going to scroll down. And we will go down here to the register area. So before you bind, you want to double check this item over here. So this is the power output of the 900 megahertz antenna. So obviously if you're running an access receiver, you will not have 900. But in the 900 megahertz section, you have the ability to change the power output. 10 milliwatts is the lowest power. The highest power is 1,000 milliwatts for the 900 megahertz. Personally, I like running 100. A lot of people think that's a little bit high for just regular line of sight flying, but that's what I run. So let's go ahead and switch that over. You do want to set that up and change that before you bind your receiver, because the receiver needs to bind in whatever power it is. If you just change that, it's not going to do anything until you bind the receiver. So it will not actually change the power until you bind the receiver. So, all right, so that's done. Now we want to go ahead and do a register. So a couple of things on register. First of all, registering is only required if this receiver has never been registered to this transmitter. So you are registering to this transmitter, and what it's doing is it's putting that number, the owner registration ID, it puts that set of characters and numbers onto the receiver. So you're uniquely identifying this transmitter for this receiver. The difference between registering and binding is register is for the radio and bind is for the model file. So the interesting thing that you can do is if you happen to have two radios and you're using your second radio as a backup, you can make sure that your second radio has the same owner registration ID as your first radio. And if you do that, and you've already registered to one transmitter, it's also registered to the other transmitter, so you won't have to do a register. You'll still have to bind, but you will not have to register. All right, so let's start the registration process. So you hit the register button, and it starts the registering process. Now on a TD-R18, the button for register is right here. So I'm going to press that down while I power on the receiver. As I plug it in, you'll see that this menu comes up. So it tells you what the registration ID is. The name of the receiver right now is TD-R18. You can change it if you want. And in some situations, it's actually a good idea to change it. And the next item is UID. For a single receiver setup, we don't have to do anything here. We just go ahead and hit register. So the registration is now okay. The next thing that we need to do is bind it. So I'm going to go over here to RX1. If you notice, there's three places that you can bind a receiver. You got RX1, RX2, and RX3. In other words, for this one model file, you can hook up to 3 receivers in it using the internal module. So let's go to RX1. Now it's saying bind. And all you need to do is unplug the power. You don't have to press the button that's over there, and then just plug it in. When you do that, it'll say TDR18. Click on that, and now you're bound. It's really that simple. Okay, we have one receiver, it's registered and bound. Now, let's just say that we're setting up a fancy pants expensive plane. In that case, I want to have the most safety and most redundancy as possible. So you do have redundancy right now with your 2.4 and your 900 megahertz, but we can add another receiver in here and use this receiver to be the redundancy for that receiver, so you'll have even more antennas. So the TDMX is what I like to use. It's a very small, lightweight receiver, and it's perfect for this application where you don't need all the servo channel wires. Now, this receiver is capable of outputting 4 PWM signals. So in other words, you can run servos directly from this receiver on these bare wires. And so you would have to like set something up to actually use this if you're going to use it in that mode. But the reason why they're bare is because most people don't really use those. What they do is use these ones that are the ones with connectors on it. And let me explain these wires. So you've got a black wire, which is ground. You have a red wire, which is power. So that's how you get power into that receiver. And then you also have a green wire and a white wire. And you can check the instruction manual to figure out what the wires are, what the wire colors are. But in a TDMX, the way that it works is the white wire is Sbus out, and the green wire is either S port or F bus. Now, to connect this TDMX to this TDR18, I'm going to go S bus in on the TDR18 and S bus out, so the white wire of the TDMX. So since they are 3 wires, to make it simpler myself, I'm going to hook up an extension. And lo and behold, it's the same color combination, and we're going to use that. So I'm going to hook up black to black, red to red, and white to white. See if I can get this in there. There it goes. All right. The first thing I will do is I will go ahead and make one of these ports, one of these channels, and get it out of channel mode or PWM mode and make it into SBus in. Now, on a TDR10, TDR18, and TDR12, you change one of these ports over to SBus in. The only gotcha is only one port can be changed, and that's port 1. So we're going to get rid of channel 1, and we're going to change it to SBus in. I'm going to go to TDR18, click on that in the RF menu, go to Options. Now, I'm going to scroll down to, notice it says pin 1, channel 1. So they're actually letting you know that that pin 1, by calling it pin 1 and not channel 1, can be something else. So in this case, we're going to go and click on 1 and change it to SBus in. Now, so channel 1 obviously is ailerons, and that's kind of important. So we just got rid of channel 1. What do we do? Well, since these are pins, I just find a pin that I'm not using. So for example, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. Pin, like the last pin, pin 18. We'll say we're not going to use all 18 channels. We just change that to be channel 1. There we go. So now I just make sure that ailerons on channel 1 gets plugged into pin 18, and we're fine. All right. So now we can start the process of registering and binding for this receiver. I'm going to return out of this menu. I'll go back out here and go to the register mode. So the only thing we care about is powering it, so we need to power it by plugging it in here. There is no problem leaving this receiver powered up and on while we set up another receiver. So I'm going to go over here to register, find the little button on the TDMX and press it, hold it down, plug in, and there you go, TDMX. Now, over here, it was on 1, but generally speaking, if you register a new receiver, it will be on 0. And do you remember when we registered the TDR18, I pointed out UID? Let me turn this down a little bit. And it was at 0. So you want to make sure not to use 0 for the TDMX. You want to use something else. So let's use 1 for this TDMX and then register it. Registration OK. Now that receiver is registered. Now the reason why, if the UID or the user ID on the TDR18 is 0 and on the TDMX is 1, the telemetry information will not conflict. So a lot of people still do an old school method, which is turning off the telemetry on your secondary receiver. That does work, but that means that if it does go to the secondary receiver, you've got no telemetry. But if you do this, where you make the UID different between the 2 receivers that are in your system, now you don't have to turn off telemetry on that secondary receiver. All right, so we are registered. Go over to RX2, and we'll do a bind. Waiting for a receiver. Unplug the power, and plug in. TDMX. Click on that. Bind, it's OK. So now we're bound, and now we are registered on 2 receivers. And let's confirm that it works. So I've got a servo over here, and I'm going to hook it up to, say, channel 2. There we go. So we know it works, and we know that this receiver is getting signal and is operating this servo on channel 2. What we don't know is if we got everything set up correctly, and that if I do happen to lose signal on this receiver, whether or not this receiver is going to take over. So we got to test that. And even if you follow the instructions all the way through, I would suggest testing it yourself just to make sure everything is done right. So I'm going to go over here to the TDR18, click on that. And the way that I test it is by unbinding this receiver. So I go over here to reset bind, click on that. Are you sure you want to unbind this receiver? Yes. Now, this receiver is no longer receiving signal. You see how it's red? But I still have control. All right, so let's go ahead and bind this receiver back up again. Waiting for receiver, and unplug and plug in. Now, remember that as you unplug and you plug back in, this particular case it didn't, but it may come up with the other receiver too. So select device, TDR18. So if you have 2 devices like this, TDMX, it might come up there. So just make sure you're choosing the right one. So in this case, only that one came up. TDR18, bind is OK. And there we go. So now we're bound again. Now, if I unbind and bind, I do like to do a reset just to make sure that everything is good. So I'm going to unplug, plug back in. So just because we're using a TDR18, I'm going to show you a couple more things. So number one is this is an 18-channel receiver. Now, the other thing is I said that this was a 4-channel receiver. The God's honest truth between both these receivers is both these receivers are actually capable of 24 channels. It just has 18 PWM outputs, and this one only has 4. So for example, this receiver, even though it's only got 4 PWM outputs or 4 servo outputs, this is capable of running all the devices that are in here using Sbus. So the only problem is, are we actually getting 18 channels? And the answer right now is no. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug this servo, And I'll go ahead and plug it into channel 17 because I already set that up. So here's channel 17. And what I did, and I'll go back so I can show you, I created a mix. And this mix is aileron controlling channel 17. But if you take a look, it doesn't work. And I'll show you why. I'm going to go to RF system again. If you look down here, it says channel range 1 through 16. So this RF output is only giving me 16 channels. That is the default. So for when you create a model file, it always sets the channel range to 1 through 16. And why is that? How come not 24? Well, the transmitter transmits the channels 8 at a time. So you can do channels 1 through 8. Then if you've got 16 channels, it'll do 9 through 16, and then it'll do the 17 through 24. Wow, that was math. So the difference is a little bit more latency, and quite honestly, it's not a lot, and most people can't tell the difference. But for the people that want the lowest amount of latency possible, you want to keep these numbers low. So for example, if you're a racer dude and you want to have full telemetry, but you want minimal latency, and you're only using 8 channels or less, then switch this to 8 channel mode. But in this case, since I have something plugged into 17, I'm going to go from 16, I'll go to 24. So now I've got 24 channels, and now my channel 17 now works. Okay, so the question now is, does this work on channel 17? And the answer to that right now is no, and I'll prove it to you. Go over here, and we'll do the same thing. We will unbind by resetting the bind on the TDR18. Yes, and look at that, no control. So the problem is Sbus traditionally is 16 channels. Let me go ahead and rebind this. So actually, no, let's just keep it unbound. So what we need to do is we need to go over here, go to options on the TDMX, and the Sbus mode, we're going to change that to 24 channels. And there we go. Now I've got control. Let's go ahead and rebind. Unplug. Plug in. TDR18. Yes. Bind is okay. I'm going to go ahead and reset it. So remember that if you are actually using more than 16 channels, you got to set your channel range to 1 to 24, and on your secondary receiver, because it's communicating via Sbus to that port, you want to set this Sbus to be 24 channels as well. Let's take a look at some of these other options so we can just go through it. So we know this is state on protocol, so whatever the receiver is, always remember that whatever your main receiver is, it's got to be the same protocol on your secondary. So if you're using a TD receiver on your primary, your secondary obviously has to be a TD as well. Okay, model ID. Again, you don't have to change that, and that assigns the next available model ID to this model file, and that's part of the bind information. Channel range, I think we understand. And over here, antenna. So I just want to talk about this really quick. In this particular radio, you can change the 900 megahertz antenna from internal to external. And then you have the plug on the top of the radio to put an external antenna on. And so for people that want a high-end antenna and they want an external antenna, you know, they can do that. But I suggest never to do this unless you are using an external antenna. And always remember to hook up your antenna before you power on your radio. So you can burn out the RF module if you have this set to external antenna, but you don't have an antenna plugged into it. So be very careful about that. All right, so I think that's everything I want to cover. If you have any questions, feel free to comment on this video or email me at jose@freesky-rc.com. Thank you very much and have a good day.